How do you follow up with a sequel to a genre-defining game? Is it better to create a new formula from the ground up, or play it safe by building off the original's ideas? Creating a good sequel is hard, especially when it serves as a continuation to a successful game. Build something too close to the source material and it'll feel redundant, but stray too far and it'll feel alienating. A sequel's success is based on how well it juggles embodying the soul of its predecessor and creating a new experience for the player. Essentially, the game needs to feel the same while introducing new concepts, mechanics, and ideas. The experience needs to be simultaneously fresh and familiar. For Metroid, that meant taking Super Metroid's best elements, level design, movement, exploration, environmental storytelling, and elaborating on it. Super's success left big shoes for any follow-up title to fill, and it's obvious that the developers knew this because it took them 7 years to craft their ideal sequel. The result? Metroid Fusion. Fusion takes the Super Metroid formula and redefines it. After all, this game is a sequel to Super Metroid, not just Super Metroid on the Game Boy. A lot of what was in Super Metroid carries over. There are still secret areas to explore, hidden power-ups to secure, complicated puzzles to solve, and well-designed environments to traverse. Everything that makes a Metroid is here. However, Fusion also breaks new ground for the series. This time, we follow Samus through a linear progression system with stronger emphasis on direct storytelling. At its heart, Fusion carries the soul of a Metroid game. However, it doesn't sacrifice its uniqueness in trying to remain familiar. Samus once again finds herself on the surface of SR-388, this time leading a research team of Federation scientists. She's attacked by a strange creature known as the X-parasite, an organism that kills its host and assumes a mutated version of its identity. By the time Samus and the research team depart for the research station, the X have already invaded her central nervous system. She loses consciousness, crashing her gunship into a nearby asteroid field. The Federation attempts to retrieve her, but she isn't doing well. Because of her genetic bond with her power suit, parts of it must be amputated, and then are sent off to the lab for further review. Samus's condition only worsens, and in a last-ditch effort to save her, a scientist proposes that they use a DNA sample of the Metroid hatchling to create a vaccine cure. The experiment succeeds, but alters Samus's genetic makeup in the process. What's left of her suit fuses with her body, leaving her as an amalgamation of Chozo, human, and Metroid DNA. Meanwhile, an inexplicable explosion has occurred on Biologics Research Station. After she comes to, Samus is given a ship by the Federation and instructed to investigate. Although Samus is alone on her mission, the ship does come equipped with an artificial intelligence unit. She names it Adam because the AI reminds her of her former commanding officer, Adam Malkovich. The newly christened AI serves to relay updates and direct orders from the Federation to Samus. The main setting of Fusion's gameplay and story takes place on the Biologic Research Station, or BSL for short. Unlike previous Metroids, where the games were set on planets, Fusion is contained in a man-made space facility. This laboratory is built into an asteroid orbiting SR-388 and was designed to artificially recreate a variety of environments in order to conduct research on various specimens. It's no Zebes, but it offers just as much, if not more, in terms of environmental diversity. As well, combining both natural and man-made elements in every area is a creative motif that does numbers for the game's atmosphere. Once setting foot into the BSL, you'll finally gain control over Samus. Adam will tell you to check out the explosion site, point you in the right direction, and send you on your way. The path to the objective is a bit uneasy. Earlier, Samus said that the explosion awoke a nameless fear in her heart, and that fear is built up here. Certain structures at the station are destroyed, the lights are out, and something just feels off. Arriving at the quarantine bay, you'll discover that the samples that were extracted from SR-388 have been infected by the X. Afraid of succumbing the same fate that Samus did earlier, I ran back to the navigation room to report to Adam immediately. According to further research, it's been discovered that SR-388 is the home of the terrifying X, and that Metroids were their main predators. With no more Metroids, though, this means the X can run rampant. It also means Samus's new Metroid-infused state will make her invulnerable to the X-parasites, actually allowing her to absorb them to recover health and ammunition. Pretty handy, and a creative way to explain an in-universe mechanic. There's a pretty big trade-off, though. Metroids are susceptible to the cold, and now so is Samus. Also, without her suit and power-ups, Samus is in a weakened state, only being at 10% total power. Adam detects large numbers of the X gathering on the main deck and sends you after them. If it isn't apparent at this point, this is how Fusion handles its progression. It's objective-based and linear in its storytelling, so Adam is going to be giving a lot of direction throughout the game, especially at the beginning. It's certainly not a traditional sandbox-esque Metroid game, but succeeds in what it attempts to execute with its linear structure. Pressing on to the next area, you'll have a chance to experiment with Samus's refined moveset, which is entirely streamlined. She's faster, her jump is less floaty, and the wall jump is significantly easier to pull off. Though stiffer and more limited than Super's, this is a good trade-off. I can't help but find these streamlined controls are no accident. If R&D 1 wanted to keep Samus's moveset as it was in Super Metroid, they would have. It worked well enough in that game. But this is meant to feel different. It's meant to complement Samus's condition. She lost her bulky power suit, so she's faster, more agile. She can grab onto walls now and wall jump with ease, but all at the cost of being much more vulnerable. During a playthrough, you may not feel that same sense of isolation you would get on Zebes, but you certainly do feel vulnerable, and the first area serves as a bit of an introduction to this feeling. The player is provided with some simple platforming, wall jumping, and even given an introduction on how to use the wall cling. The movement is seamless and the controls work surprisingly well. I was initially very skeptical with how Fusion would control because of the Game Boy's lack of inputs. In contrast to the Super Nintendo's controller, the Game Boy is missing the X and Y buttons, but Fusion makes great use of its limited hardware and almost creates what I would say is a near-perfect control scheme for Metroid. The jump is bound to A, shooting to B, and the missiles are fired by holding R and pressing the B button. The L button aims Samus's blaster up at a 45, but because of the reassigned R button, there is no designated button for aiming down. Rather, you'll have to press L and tap the D-pad down to switch the direction. This makes aiming on the fly a bit tricky sometimes, but since you'll be firing up most of the time, it's not too big of an issue. This mechanic is also in play when climbing up ladders, so it feels very thought out. Ultimately, the controls are less interactive, but more streamlined as a result. Once arriving at the objective point, you'll be confronted by a group of X that quickly gather and form into a clone of Arachnis. It's apparent from the first one alone that Fusion has greatly improved the quality of boss fights. Where most bosses in the series past were defeated by spamming missiles and dodging repetitive attacks, Fusion's bosses have diverse attack patterns and encourage exploiting the environment for an advantage. After defeating and absorbing the X within Arachnis, you will regain the Morph Ball, which will allow you to advance. A brief conversation with Adam will tell you that the X have already infiltrated the breeding sectors, the main areas of the BSL that are engineered to artificially emulate different environments. With that, it's off to the main elevator room. On the ride down, the camera lingers a bit at the top of the room, making you feel a bit on edge. This adds a title to the seemingly nameless fear Samus felt earlier. Unfortunately, the power to the elevator cuts off, so there's no way to go back and investigate. Adam tells you there are unknown forces at play and to be cautious, but for now, you'll have to wait it out. With fear in the back of your mind, it's on to Sector 1. This area is a faithful replication of SR388. The colors, background, and structure all come together to perfectly recapture the essence of Metroid 2. It's really nice to see the environment fully reimagined with no hardware limitations. X-parasites have already infected every specimen here and clogged up some of the atmospheric stabilizers, so it's up to you to clear out threats and explore. You'll come to learn that interacting with the environment can be quite rewarding and will more often than not result in uncovering secret areas or gaining additional upgrades. After returning most of the atmospheric stabilizers to normal, you'll gain access to a room containing a classic Chozo statue holding a power-up. As you step closer, it transforms into a Core X, a subtle reminder that this is not a traditional Metroid, so be prepared for the unexpected. After defeating the Core X and acquiring the Charge Beam, it's time for your routine check-in with Adam. He informs you that he's learned the identity of the mysterious figure from earlier. It's the group of X-parasites that infected Samus and her suit. Because of the residual DNA left in the amputated suit parts when they were sent over to the BSL, the X multiplied within it, along with inheriting all of Samus's past abilities from Super Metroid. Adam names this beast the Samus X, or SAX for short. This sets up a clear power dynamic. Samus is in a weakened state while her doppelganger runs around the station possessing the ability to absolutely obliterate her at any moment. With the power bomb, screw attack, and even ice beam all at its disposal, Samus doesn't stand much of a chance. Additionally, there is a layer of irony here to color a veteran's experience. If you've played Super Metroid, you'll know what it felt like to absolutely tear through everything towards the end of the game. Now that same power has fallen into the hands of something extremely dangerous, making the inevitable confrontation all the more terrifying. Adam says that HQ has developed a Morph Bomb upgrade that can be obtained via download, but to reach the download station you'll need to go to Sector 2 and disengage the Level 1 security locks. As per protocol, the room to do so isn't marked on the map, so it's up to you to find and release the locks yourself. Fusion may be linear, but it does offer the player a set amount of freedom during each objective. This is one of the things I really appreciate about the way Fusion presents its linear experience. You'll often be told where to go but not how to get there, and while there are plenty of optional upgrades and side objectives, you'll almost never get lost. After releasing the level 1 security locks and gaining the Morph Bomb data from the download room, you'll hear an explosion, drop down, and discover that the door that you came through has been destroyed, similar to the one that the SAX destroyed earlier, a friendly reminder that you are not alone, something is after you, and you're still quite vulnerable. Then you'll be challenged to find an alternate exit with the newly acquired Morph Bombs. This idea will repeat a lot. You'll be guided to a new ability and tested on how to use it. Essentially, Fusion will provide the tools and you figure out the rest. There are a few times that it does not succeed at its ambiguous nature though. In the depths of Sector 2, there's an area you'll have to fall into to progress, but the walls on either side are too high to jump to. I spent several minutes completely confused, jumping around, then bombing every possible surface, just for a pillar to randomly appear and lift me out. There's no other way to escape, and it was pretty frustrating just sitting there, wondering if I had somehow soft-locked myself. But this doesn't happen just once. No, it happens a second time, almost immediately after the first. You'll enter a room with a boss door. You can see it, but you can't interact with it. There are no environmental cues whatsoever, and I was stuck yet again for minutes, aimlessly running around trying to figure out if there was a power-up I missed or an enemy I didn't kill. The solution to this is climbing up to the room above the boss door and shooting the floor to fall down into the area with the door. There is no way the player should be expected to accidentally stumble upon the main path of progression. These types of ambiguous puzzles work for optional side objectives, rewarding players for creative exploration, but they don't work along the main path of progression, especially with Fusion's linear structure. I want to make it clear that I don't mean difficult puzzles shouldn't be placed along the player's path. This would make the game boring. Rather, I mean the ones that are so cryptic you'd almost have to stumble upon them by accident. This rarely happens, but when the player is running around revisiting areas and repeating actions they've already completed, it puts a bit of a damper on the fun. The secrets that are scattered along the main path work really well though. Bonus points to the ones that have more than one solution. There's one in Sector 3 that I still am not entirely sure how to actually complete. There's an energy tank at the top of the room with platforms to the right, which I assume are of some importance. What I actually did though was ignore the section to the right and instead shine Spark up to the top, allowing myself to fall and grab the energy tank. These are the types of ideas that make Metroid what it is, so it's nice to see them succeed when they do in Fusion, but it makes me question why they fail at all. I digress. After defeating the boss and acquiring the jump ball and high jump, you'll have your second encounter with the SAX. Fortunately, you won't have to interact with it, but it's a good reminder that you are not at the top of the food chain. On the way to Sector 4, Samus shares a bit of her point of view. In her current state, she doesn't feel strong enough to take on the SAX. While this may seem obvious, this window into her mind creates a harmonic dynamic between player and main character. Sector 4 is another area that embodies a concept that I particularly love about Fusion. It's an aquatic environment, but it doesn't look like the cliché ocean or beach area. Rather, it looks man-made, as a research lab would. This sector is mostly focused on platforming. You'll be moving up through tight corridors while avoiding exposed wires and electrified water. It's a relatively short section with a boss fight in the middle. After gaining the speed booster, you'll lower the water level and loop under everything, putting you back at the entrance. This process is repeated in the next area, Sector 3. First unlock the security hatch, then obtain the super missile, which works a bit differently than in Super. Rather than being an equipable item, super missiles stack on top of regular missiles. In fact, there isn't a select menu like in Super at all. I can't say I really miss it though. While it was never really offensive, it did take me out of the game a bit to have to stop and wait while I attempted to cycle through all my abilities. Ultimately, I think it's a change for the better, especially with what the Game Boy was working with in terms of controls. You'll use your newly acquired missile upgrade in a brief fight with a rogue security drone and then head back to the entrance on an all-new path. With the level 2 security hatches open, all sectors have been infiltrated by X-parasites. By this point, the X have destroyed every single data room you've visited thus far, and you'll have to head to Sector 6 for the next upgrade, the Varia suit. Before that, however, the player is treated to some information that Samus is not. An unknown individual contacts Adam, inquiring if Samus suspects anything. If it wasn't already apparent the Federation is hiding something from Samus, it should be now. Observant players will remember that earlier in Sector 4, Adam mentions that there's a download room there, but it's locked behind the level 4 security hatches, so he dismisses it and sends you instead to Sector 3. You would think he just doesn't want the X to invade sensitive areas, but if you read between the lines, yeah. Obviously, Adam's main priority is aiding and protecting you, right? It's around now where Adam transitions from a simple guide into a more dynamic vessel to tell the story. He's a dry computer AI obsessed with following orders. Even Samus acknowledges this, pointing out the difference between her and her former CO Adam. As the game progresses, the facade of him being a guide for Samus will begin to fade. While he does a lot for the story, his overall impact on the gameplay is minimal, and I mean that in a good way. They could have easily made Adam able to contact you from anywhere in the station, but they chose to make his conversations limited to navigation rooms. This helps maintain some of that trademark Metroid loneliness feel, which easily could have been ruined if Adam was popping up every 5 seconds. Once you're out of a navigation room, you're on your own. No interruptions, no needless hints, just you and the environment. There are some instances where Adam's comments are redundant, but those are few and far between, and I can excuse them. It's really easy to ruin a game with an annoying guide, but Fusion successfully creates one that positively affects both gameplay and atmosphere. Where Sectors 1 through 4 repeated more of the same, Sector 6 shifts gears a bit. The X-parasites have anticipated Samus' presence and evolved to combat her Metroid DNA. They now have ice properties, so absorbing them will inflict massive damage. This section is a tense race to the data room, and avoiding the cold X can be very difficult. Paired with the fact that there isn't actually a very good way to regain health, this segment is a refreshing challenge. It builds tension by echoing Fusion's trademark feeling of vulnerability through its gameplay. Up until this point, you've been told Samus is weak to ice, but now you're actually experiencing it. Watching the massive amount of health that goes down each time you can't get away from an X-parasite is enough to keep you moving as fast as possible. In fact, the game will keep you on the edge of your seat for quite a while. At the end of the gauntlet, you'll run into an apparent dead end. The floor will crumble and you'll be caught under the platform. On your way back to the front of the room, the SAX enters. It drops a power bomb, destroying the wall and damaging you, but is seemingly unaware of your presence. The game then pulls the rug out from under your feet and you'll be dropped right in front of the SAX. It quickly freezes you and blasts you into the next room with a missile. Safe to say, it's time to run. After a brief chase sequence, you'll finally get away from the SAX, beat up a giant Core X, and claim the Varia suit for your own. This will allow you to absorb the cold X-parasites, eliminating the threat within Sector 6 and granting access to Sector 5, a sub-zero environment. There isn't much time spent here at first. You're only really here to grab an upgrade, since the last data room that isn't destroyed or requires maximum security clearance is here. Rinse and repeat the process of finding the security room, then getting the upgrade from the data room, except this time the process is much quicker. This upgrade is an ice missile, which is a bit confusing. Adam says Samus' genetic makeup would reject an ice beam upgrade, which makes sense, but then why wouldn't it reject an ice missile? I may be nitpicking here, sure, but I think it's a bit odd that any ice ability would work at all.
Emergency in Sector 3.
The game quickly shifts gears again, with an emergency alarm going off. The main cooling unit has overheated, no doubt a result of the X. You'll have 6 tense minutes to get to Sector 3 and stabilize the cooler. This is the first time in a Metroid game where I've actually felt there was a genuine possibility of the countdown timer running out before I completed the objective. The pathway to the cooler is pretty challenging. There are tons of enemies and a lot of genuinely difficult platforming that can quickly become frustrating if you aren't careful. You even have to fight a Core X while the timer is running down. It's another segment of the game that adds to the motif of tension Fusion so commonly uses. Defeating the Core X will net you the wide beam and allow you to restore the cooling unit. Adam begs the question, why would a self-preserving species like the X attempt to take out the station with them on it? Perhaps there are other X alive on the surface of SR-388, and the ones on board the station are trying to keep them alive. Samus is beginning to get a little stronger, but she still isn't a match for the SA-X, and as long as that's the case, the X-parasites as a whole. So what was the purpose of the attempted sabotage? Now that the game has exhausted its good ideas for a moment, it's time for some padding. Adam detects biosigns on the main deck and you're told to go check it out. Turns out the Edakuns and Decora from Super Metroid are on board the BSL and they haven't been infected by the X. Nothing really notable comes from this. This portion is just a waste of time and it feels like needless nostalgic pandering. On your way back though, you'll uncover something concerning. It is very apparent at this point that Adam and the Federation are keeping secrets from you. Why could they possibly need Ridley's frozen remains, and how did they even come about them in the first place? After this discovery, you'll take a quick detour through Sector 5 to pick up the power bomb before heading back to your ship to reconvene with Adam. On the way back, the station loses power, and you're forced to use your tools to carve a path back to the ship. After a brief check-in with Adam, you'll head to the main reactor core to check out the power loss. There's no map data for this area, so you'll have to find it yourself. When you get there, you'll discover that vines are growing inside of the reactor, which will require you to track down the source of it in order to restore power. Eventually, you'll come across a cryptic morph ball maze. I'm not sure how to feel about this area. On one hand, it does encourage experimentation, but it can get a bit frustrating, and with how long it takes to get through this area, dying at the boss that's right ahead can make for a tedious walk back. At the end of the maze, you'll discover a large spider inside the reactor. It'll attack you and you'll need to defeat it in order to advance. You'll receive the space jump for this feat, allowing you to ascend to a control room to activate auxiliary power. The navigation and save rooms will once again be operable, but you'll need to continue looking for the source of the overgrowth in order to restore the main reactor. The space jump will allow you to investigate further up the reactor shaft. Using it, you'll come across a small corridor filled with vines that you can clear out and enter. Once you're inside, you'll hear some familiar footsteps coming from below. It seems the SA-X has begun to more accurately pinpoint your location. Earlier in Sector 2, it's there with you and you can see it walking around, but it never finds you. In Sector 6 though, it's right on your tail. It wouldn't have seen you if the floor didn't give away, but it got extremely close on its own. Now the SA-X has anticipated where you'd end up and beat you to the scene. You can't see it, but the continuous tapping of its footsteps inform you that it's patrolling, waiting for you. While you'd never willingly want to drop down in front of it, in order to pursue the source of the outage, you'll have to press forward. Once you do finally bite the bullet and drop down, the SA-X isn't your only problem. The room that you're in has one door, and the SA-X is guarding it. For the first time, you'll be forced to interact with the SA-X, but you can't even put a scratch on it. All you can do is hope to freeze it with an ice missile and then run for your life. That's not the only danger though. Your escape route isn't a clear path. It's filled with obstacles that you have to navigate, and it makes it all the more stressful that you have to do this while dodging a deadly ice beam. I died quite a few times in this sequence alone. I kept choking on the door opening sequence, and before I even entered the area, I was unprepared. The SA-X is no joke, and if you aren't at full health when you encounter it, it can pretty easily make quick work of you. Once you manage to get away from the SA-X, you'll get to explore more of the area you found yourself in. This turns out to be somewhere in the depths of Sector 2. This area is much more overgrown than the Sector 2 you visited earlier though, so it's clear you're on the right track. Eventually, you'll arrive at a room where the source of the growth lurks. It's a ruined Chozo statue with vines sprouting out of it, growing up and out into the room. Hit it with enough missiles and it'll begin to respond with counterfire. Destroying it completely will reveal a Core X was within it. Defeat it and you'll be able to recover the plasma beam, the first weapon in your arsenal that can physically harm the SA-X. Samus is beginning to grow stronger without the aid of the Federation, and as a result, she's gaining back her autonomy. You'll no longer be relying on Adam to guide you through the station because you've acquired the keys you'll need to safely traverse through it without being harmed. It feels good to finally get the plasma beam because it's the first step in a process of putting you back into a position of power. The scales seem to be finally tipping in your favor. As soon as you were getting comfortable though, an explosion inflicts massive damage on Sector 5. When arriving there, Adam will warn you to be on the lookout for Nightmare, a biomechanical organism that, like many other specimens on the BSL, has succumbed to the X. In an earlier visit to Sector 5, the Nightmare's shadow loomed in the background, but you couldn't make out exactly what it was. And even now, while the game is setting you on a trajectory to face Nightmare, you can only see the destruction that it's caused. The structure of the station is crumbling, with support beams and windows in shambles, and water flowing in from every corner. It's a foreboding symbol of what might be to come when you finally encounter Nightmare. When you finally do encounter it, everything will feel unsettling. Nightmare has this creepy, metallic outside, and once you burst it open with your missiles, it reveals this agonizing face, melting and falling out from its host body. Past the design elements, the fight's unique mechanics are crafted to unnerve you and shake you out of your normal play patterns. Nightmare's gravity core pulls physical objects to the ground with great force, requiring you to take trust in your skill with aiming and positioning rather than just spamming missiles. It also skews your movement, making jumping feel like you're in water. Even the disturbing and uncomfortable music adds to the effect. From the top down, this is my favorite boss in Metroid Fusion. The thematic and gameplay components come together to craft an amazing boss. Defeating Nightmare will grant you the gravity suit, allowing you to travel through underwater areas with ease. The game will now give you some time to yourself. An entirely new area of Sector 5 flooded by water can be explored, and rather than looping back around to Adam, it branches into an underwater portion of Sector 4. In fact, for quite some time, you'll be entirely cut off from communication with Adam, leaving you to make some important decisions all on your own. The branching areas contain optional upgrades and tons of secrets to uncover, which are hinted at through environmental cues. There's one area with a bridge encased in glass that shares a similar appearance to the one in Meridia, so if you've played Super Metroid, you might know to attempt to powerbomb this area, and doing so will reward you with a missile upgrade. This isn't an area that's designed to be difficult to explore. Instead, it's an immersive marvel, a massive man-made aquatic paradise designed to in-house entire ecosystems of marine life. It's somewhat of a break from the tension of the main narrative. The visuals are beautiful, the area is filled with color and vibrance, and it's genuinely some of the best sprite work in the entire game. All this theming is backed by a curious yet cautious music track. I couldn't have imagined a better track to accompany the depths of Sector 4. It perfectly encapsulates the mood of this area. The curious harp and soft long tones of the melody are an allegory for what the main character and player are feeling. A bit of a break from the norm, perhaps a relaxing rather than tense portion of the game. Yet all that is contrasted by some occasional dissonance in the background, reminding you that while you might be safe for now, there is an ever-growing threat still lurking somewhere in the BSL. And on top of that, the SAX might not even be your only problem. Advancing through some hidden pathways, you'll come across the level 4 security room. This is the final level of security hatch, what Adam said withheld sensitive areas. In order to progress any further, however, you'll need to unlock them, disregarding Adam's concern. It's here that Samus's submissive behavior begins to fade. You'll have to make the choice on whether to respect the wishes of the Federation or open the doors and press forward. Though all evidence thus far dictates the Federation isn't really rooting for you, so why should you respect their wishes? Coming out of the underwater portion in Sector 4 will place you in the very data room Adam wrote off earlier. Stepping into the station will trigger an automatic upgrade download for diffusion missiles, but the Federation never mentioned a new upgrade at all. Why would they design an upgrade and upload it to the station, but never send you to get it? Could it be that they don't really want to give you all the tools needed to stop the SAX? After using the diffusion missiles to clear a path to the nearest nav room, you'll be reunited with Adam for the first time in a while. He'll scold you, telling you he did not authorize the bypass in the level 4 security locks, demanding more discretion from you in the future. He then goes on to claim that not being informed about the diffusion missile upgrade must have been a procedural error on HQ's part. Right. All this is followed by the information that the security robot from Sector 3 has returned and invaded Sector 6. He finally closes the conversation with the patronizing line, "You know what to do." It's obvious Adam still sees Samus as the weak, subservient position she was trapped in at the beginning of the game, but that's hardly the case now, and both the player and Samus are well aware of this fact. Samus was never a weak person, just in a weak position due to the surrounding circumstances. Now, however, the scales are tipping in her favor, and she'll likely have a fighting chance against the SAX, a revelation that concerns the Federation. Going into Sector 6 is no longer just about the security robot, but uncovering answers as to what the Federation is really doing with the BSL. After eliminating the main threat, you'll gain the final beam upgrade, the Wave Beam, which will allow you to open a door from the opposite side, leading to a restricted area Samus was clearly not meant to see. It's here that everything comes together. It all finally makes sense. That suspicious message from the Federation, Adam's reluctance to open the high-level security hatches, even the frozen remains of Ridley, all clear as day. The Federation was cloning Metroids, playing with the very fire they sought to put out, and they knew that if Samus found out, she would be smart enough to try and stop them. Before you can even fully process this, the SAX bursts in, blows up the Metroid's containment unit, and begins to fire away at them. The Metroids fight back, the SAX being no match for its natural predator, even with all of Samus's abilities. The laboratory begins to collapse under all the chaos, and you'll need to make your escape before it's jettisoned into space. Interestingly, on the way out, none of the Metroids attack you. I was confused at first, but later realized it's due to Samus's Metroid genetics. On the other side of the door, a navigation room with an angry Adam is waiting. He expresses his extreme frustration with Samus's disobedience. Then, we see something that hasn't happened before. Samus receives her own text window in order to interact verbally with Adam. She doesn't need to talk back, but it's symbolic in a way. She's regained her autonomy, she's no longer taking orders, and she's ready to question the actions of the Federation as well as hold them accountable. Adam confirms everything. The Federation has been working on a Metroid breeding program, for peaceful applications only, of course. He says that biologics research has uncovered data that has allowed them to expedite the breeding of Alpha, Gamma, Zeta, and even Omega Metroids all in a matter of days, a process that would normally take years. Exploring the rest of the station will reveal that all the experiments they conducted with that data were successful. This is actually foreshadowed in the very beginning of the game with the existence of Sector 1. SRX is a faithful recreation of SR388. Now, why would the Federation need a breeding environment tuned to the homeworld of the Metroids? The entire twist was right in front of the player the whole time, and it seems obvious in retrospect, but for a first playthrough, it's a subtle touch that can be easily overlooked. Additionally, Adam reveals that the SAX has asexually reproduced, and there are now more than 10 on board. He commands Samus to head back to the ship and evacuate the station, as the SAX's growing numbers are too big a fire to put out. He'll also report your discovery of the Metroid breeding program to HQ, though not before advising that there may be consequences for your actions. On the way out of the area, you'll encounter another result of Biologics' cloning program, Ridley. But this isn't the Ridley you know and hate. It's a clone, one that's been infected by the X, and thus, you'll have to face down against the terrifying Neo Ridley. I have to say, for the cinematic build-up this fight had, it's a bit lacking. In fact, it's almost identical to the Ridley fight in Super Metroid, with only a few variations in attack. The fusion fight is definitely an improvement over Super's Ridley, but it mostly boils down to run away and spam missiles. And you don't even really have to do the running away part. Sometimes I would just allow myself to get grabbed by Ridley in order to better position my shots and spam as fast as I could. This fight lacks engagement and difficulty, which is disappointing and indicative of a larger problem with Fusion. The boss lineup is very inconsistent. As far as quality goes, it's a bit of an improvement from Super, though it's still not perfect. Ceres's movements are more sporadic, and honestly, the screen real estate of the Game Boy is a bit too small to justify the quick reaction time needed to keep up with it. I found myself getting hit way too often, but not really knowing how I could have done anything different to avoid it. I find the Barrier Core X and the Spider Boss to be a bit uninspired. With the Barrier Core X, the main objective is to shoot the boss a lot and jump away. It's really not all that interesting. With the Spider Boss, there's a little more to chew on with avoiding its attack patterns, but it's ultimately just wait for the fire attack and then rail on its weak spot with missiles. I don't feel this way about all the bosses though. In fact, most fights are engaging and use the environment to create a unique experience. Arachnis is the first boss in the game, and it's a phenomenal tutorial battle. The fight will consist of dodging energy slashes, attacking it with missiles, and jumping around to avoid its rolling and fire attacks. You'll be forced to use the environment to your advantage by clinging to walls while waiting for the ground attacks, but departing from the wall before it can knock you over with its rolling attack. It's a wonderful way to introduce the player to the more diverse, interesting combat Fusion has to offer. The Sector 2 boss embodies the same idea, but approaches it differently. For the first part, you'll be observing and experimenting to figure out what its weak spot is while avoiding its attacks. Once the weak spot is located, it's just a matter of decent positioning and patience. Both security robots offer a unique spin on how combat is approached by having the majority of the fight take place on ladders. The first security robot fight will require good positioning, aiming, and timing. You'll be required to hang down from the ladder to avoid its pillars of fire, briefly jumping down or quickly climbing away to avoid getting hit by its jump, all the while trying to get in a shot or two every cycle. The second fight evolves this concept. Most of it will take place on the ladder again, but this time the environment plays a key role. The water below the ladder is electrified, so you can jump into it to avoid the robot or reposition, but you'll rapidly be damaged, creating this value system for the player to assess. Is it more productive to jump quickly in and out of the electrified water, or to brave direct hits from the robot? The plant core is an unconventional boss, but it services the player with a unique combat experience. Instead of the familiar, quick-paced fights, this one will feel slow and cramped. You'll be tasked with dodging falling projectiles and getting into a good position to shoot the core. There's an interesting trade-off here, because you can shoot each projectile to destroy it, but that will only leave you with a second or two to fire shots off before more projectiles spawn. Once the core is damaged enough, it'll start dishing out plasma beam shots, which will require well-timed jumps to avoid. It takes place right after an SAX encounter as well, so you're likely to be low on health, which adds to the tension. It's a pretty memorable one, even if it is a bit odd. My favorite fight by far, though, remains to be the Nightmare battle. It also utilizes a ladder, though this time vertically, and has a unique gravity gimmick, changing the pacing of the fight. Overall, this selection of bosses is a huge step in the right direction, especially coming out of Super, but there's still a lot of room to improve. After defeating Neo Ridley, you'll recover the last ability, the Screw Attack, finally putting you on an even plane with the SAX. Adam is waiting in the next navigation room for you with an infuriating update. The Federation has taken an interest to the X and suggests that Samus just leave quietly and forget everything she saw. Additionally, they wish to capture the SAX and harness its potential. They anticipated that Samus would try and stop them, so they kept her away from the SAX and in a weakened state. Turns out they did in fact withhold the plasma beam and diffusion missiles. Samus, sensing the obvious stupidity in this plan, doesn't hide her anger. She tears into Adam and the Federation for their insolence, calling them fools. The Federation, realizing Samus is no longer willing to comply and not going down without a fight, changes their mind and quickly instructs Adam to lock her in the nav room until they arrive. Lost in the moment, Samus accidentally directly addresses the AI as Adam, and it's here where I think the plot of Fusion fumbles quite badly. The AI questions Samus about who Adam is and inquires what he would do in this situation. She explains that the real Adam would reluctantly sacrifice the entire station and Samus herself for the greater good. Hearing this causes Adam's programming to hesitate, and he very suddenly switches sides and begins acting like the Adam Malkovich Samus had described in her inner monologues. The justification for this? Apparently, the Federation uploads the consciousness of certain high-ranking individuals to their database, so when the AI heard Samus call it by name, it fully reawakened the consciousness of Adam Malkovich. This outcome is stupid. There's no foreshadowing, no build-up to this turning point anywhere else in the game. Samus even goes out of her way to differentiate the two versions of Adam, stating that they're clearly not the same. Adam's dramatic change just makes no sense, and it otherwise ruins what could have been an impactful moment. It would have been much more interesting if this idea was built up over the course of the game. Maybe the AI would show some characteristics of Malkovich throughout the adventure. Samus would reflect on this in her various inner monologues, perhaps stating that the AI's mannerisms are uncanny to those of Adam. It doesn't have to be spelled out directly, but I think the gotcha nature of this moment causes it to feel like an afterthought. I actually really like the concept of the AI turning out to be the real Adam, but as it stands, we are left with a poorly written turning point with an even worse delivery, one that doesn't ring true to the game's themes and plot. Anyway, the now fully realized Adam corrects Samus. If the BSL is destroyed with her on it, it'll kill the X-parasites on board, yes, but more X will still live on along the surface of SR-388. However, there is a way to avoid this. If Samus can alter the orbit of the station so it collides with the surface of the planet during its self-destruct sequence, the X could be eradicated for good. So, it's off to the control deck to set everything into motion. On the way there, a triumphant theme begins playing. It's fitting and acts as a symbol of everything you've achieved as a player, as well as everything Samus has achieved as an individual. One might reflect on what they've overcome so far. A new, existence-threatening species has emerged, one perhaps even more dangerous than the Metroids. Out of that, the SAX has threatened Samus's life on multiple occasions, But over the course of the adventure, she's worked her way up from her reliance on the Federation. Now, she's at full power, no longer taking orders and on her way to save the galaxy, a purpose that she'll fulfill at all costs. Before you can enter the command center, an SAX storms in and attacks. It's finally time for all your hard work to pay off in a climactic battle between the two Samuses. Fusion Suit versus Power Suit, Wave Beam versus Ice Beam. This final battle is a test of your movement and skill. It requires precise jumps and well-timed shots, as well as quick reactions. This fight is a payoff for everything you've achieved throughout your adventure, and while it isn't insanely difficult, I don't think it's meant to be.
Samus is back at full power, and she can once again swiftly take out any foe with the utmost efficiency.
After besting the SAX in suit-to-suit combat, it gives in to its true form, an amalgamation of the DNA it's corrupted over time. It doesn't take much to bring it down from here, but once it's defeated, the core flies away before you have a chance to absorb it. But it doesn't matter. Samus activates the self-destruct, sets the collision course, and with that, it's time for a good old-fashioned escape sequence. The journey's finally at its end, and all that's left is to leave the station. But waiting where Samus' ship should be is a fully grown Omega Metroid. Without the Ice Beam, Samus is powerless once again. Luckily, the SAX has tracked down the Metroid and come to take its rightful place in the food chain. The Omega makes quick work of the SAX, and in a last-ditch effort to survive, it lets Samus absorb it, granting her the Ice Beam. Pressing forward, Samus attacks the Metroid. Even with the Ice Beam, it's a difficult battle, yet she prevails. With the Metroid defeated, her ship re-enters the station and she's reunited with Adam. Samus escapes just in time, leaving the BSL to crash into the surface of SR-388, eliminating the Metroids and X-parasites alike, restoring peace to the galaxy yet again. Samus may not have given her life, but she sacrificed something else in the process. Our heroine is labeled a criminal by the Federation. She disobeyed orders and destroyed not only their facility, but an entire planet. She did the right thing, but at a massive cost, her image. The galaxy may not take kindly to these actions, but Adam reassures her. Do not worry, one of them will understand, one of them must. We are bound by our experiences, they are the limits of our consciousness, but in the end, the human soul will ever reach for the truth. So how does Fusion fare as a sequel to Super Metroid? It's important to say if anyone is expecting Fusion to be a newer version of Super, they need to put those expectations behind them. This game needs to be judged on its own merits, not by what came before it. Fusion isn't a repetitive rehash of Super Metroid. It takes the excellent parts of Super, like boss fights, power-ups, and exploration, and houses them all underneath a linear system. This unique spin makes certain that the familiar Metroid tropes don't feel stale, and for that, I salute it. Its narrative, full of tense moments, echoed the gameplay's themes of vulnerability flawlessly. The encounters with the SAX were thrilling, yet terrifying, and you truly do feel helpless against it until the end of the game. Fusion's linear moments allow for it to script fear and dread into the player in a way that non-linear Metroid could never attempt to do. And though it stumbled a few times in its storytelling, that never diminished from the narrative's ability to drag me into the world of the game. It's a focus I'd love to see return in subsequent entries. Fusion's environments are well-crafted, beautiful, and diverse. They don't feel as cohesive as the ones on Zebes, but that feel is intentional. After all, Samus is on a mission in a space station full of artificial environments. The exploration of these areas is intuitive, and it somehow allows you freedom while also keeping the development of the narrative as its priority. The pacing is near perfect. Although the game starts out being a bit hand-holdy, as Samus grows and advances, Fusion doesn't hold back from throwing more at the player in order to create an experience that always keeps you engaged and always rewards you for thinking outside the box. Though some may claim that a linear Metroid game breaks away from the soul of Metroid, Fusion constantly tests your ability to observe, experiment, and explore. If that isn't Metroid to a T, I don't know what is. Although Fusion isn't the non-linear exploration game I expected it to be, it still embodied the soul of a Metroid. It captivated me from the start with how different it wasn't afraid to be. Its thematic elements are unmatched by any other entry in the series. And yes, while it stumbled a lot, I can forgive all of that just because Fusion offered up such a unique and unforgettable experience. The game was never afraid to subvert expectations or break series traditions, and while that may be a bad thing to some, I believe it's why Fusion rightfully earned its spot on the shelf. Though it may not be my favorite game in the series, I love Metroid Fusion for being different, and its unapologetic contrast to the rest of the series makes me excited for the future of Metroid.